Hi everyone, I've had a couple of questions about how to actually find the ground targets on Enigma's Cold War server in DCS, and so I thought I'd put together a little quick video just to add to my last A10 beginner's guide to help people find those targets. Now I am going to be explaining this from the point of view of an A10, but most of what I say can apply to most of the modules on the server, with the exception of what I'm going to say about the Mavericks. So the main tool for finding ground targets, I'd say, is the map. If you don't know, you can bring up the map at any time by pressing F10. You go back to the regular view by pressing F1. Now on the server, as you'll see in the FAQ page, the map is divided into sectors which are color-coded, red or blue, depending on who controls that sector. And as long as your plane isn't damaged, you will appear on the map. Now the easiest targets to find on the map I'll only be talking briefly about. These are the depots. The front and rear depots are always marked on the map, and they're marked with little orange circles, just like the ones that players can drop down to let you know that they've spotted something. Just click on a circle, you'll see what it's representing, and then you can fly over there. Equally, there are some very, very nice players, particularly in helicopters, who do some scouting around, and they will leave marked positions of bases that they've found. And if you want to be an excellent person and you get the chance to, do leave your own marks to help other ground attack players find targets nice and easily. But most of the time when people are talking about ground targets, they're talking about the frontline encampments, and by default those are not marked unless another player has already done the footwork for you. Still, the map gives us some really valuable information. The frontline encampments only spawn in the frontline sectors. So that means you only need to look over at the first enemy sector and do your patrol in there. That really narrows down the target area. Now, the other big advantage for repeatedly using the map is to make sure you don't have any blue-on-blue incidents. It's incredibly hard to tell the difference between friendly and enemy encampments unless you're within guns range, which you probably don't want to be. And so if I'm ever in doubt, I just quickly hit F10 just to check that the encampment I'm heading towards is genuinely over the enemy side of the front line, in which case it's a free target. Really, I just think of double-checking your position the exact same way that I would double-check a target identity if I was trying to shoot down a plane, just to make sure that I'm not going to be harming my team. Now, depending on where the front line is, you can make things easier on yourself by looking at major landmarks to memorize exactly where the front line is. Rivers, cities, valleys all make really good landmarks that you can just keep in mind. That way you don't have to keep tabbing back to F10 menu over and over. Other than the map, I think your best tool for finding ground targets is your good old-fashioned Mark 1 eyeball with enhanced DCS zoom. You've probably seen on my other videos that I constantly zoom in and out, and that's because I've got my zoom bound to a thumbstick, and so it works as an axis. Generally, I have it at a neutral or slightly zoomed out position when I'm looking around or scanning for air threats. When I'm looking for ground targets, I zoom in quite a long way, normally just whacking the thumbstick right up, so I can get as much detail as possible. As for what I'm looking for when scanning back and forth, the clearest sign is tracer fire. Tracer fire only comes up from the encampments, and so if you see anything, that's a really good indication that there is a target right there. And you can see tracer fire from a long distance away, so this is really good if you've got another teammate in the area who's doing an attack run. He will take tracer fire, hopefully dodging it, and then you know exactly where he's just gone in, so you know where to follow up. Equally, if you accidentally trespass over an enemy site, the tracer fire will come up to you, and even if it's firing from behind, you should be able to judge with pretty good accuracy where it's coming from. Just keep in mind that tracer fire is high caliber ammunition being shot at you, so don't get too excited, do remember to go evasive. The second easiest to spot sign, and again something that requires someone else to be going in on the target before you, is the black smoke columns from destroyed ground targets. These are very easy to confuse with the black smoke columns coming up from a downed plane, But it's always worth just investigating if you're not sure, and if you see several in one area, that's a good strong indication that that is an enemy encampment or a encampment. I particularly find this useful when you're fighting in the more mountainous areas, say if blue has pushed red quite far back. It can be really easy to get turned around in the valleys and lose track of where you just were, and so the black smoke column's really useful for getting you back on a target that you've just hit. So that all helps you narrow in on something someone else has discovered or get back to a target you've just overflown. So what about the tricky part of finding a target when you're the first one in? Well, here this is where zooming and scanning the environment really helps. What you're looking for is anything that looks unnatural. Put up a few images here of the kind of bases you can see. Most notably, they're all very blocky, very often in the dead middle of a field, and they do look very different even at range from the cities. In heavily forested areas, you'll find them in the clearings, and in less forested areas, just scan along any large openings for dots within the large opening. Now, this does take practice, but once you've got used to the kind of shapes of these encampments, it's really not too bad, and you find yourself spotting these quite often. Do just keep your head on a swivel. Just like constantly scanning for air targets, you want to be constantly scanning for ground targets. At the same time, I would advise not flying straight into enemy territory, but rather fly up and down near the border. The reason for that is you don't want to stray too far into enemy territory, make yourself really easy picking for enemy fighters or enemy SAMs. Now, your aircraft does have systems to help you find targets as well. One very often overlooked system is the RWR. Almost all of the encampments will have some form of radar-based defense, and these will stick out like a sore thumb, especially when you get close and the radar locks onto you, your RWR will start beeping like crazy. This is not just a warning for you to be careful, but you can also use it to get the exact azimuth of the enemy AA site, but you also know that you are close if not in range of it. It's useful also to know what the designations are for the different kinds of RWR signals. Now, I don't really know what these are on the Russian RWR, I'm not good at reading that yet, but for the American or NATO RWR, keep a lookout for the A, which is the General Shilkers on this server, and DE, which is the dog ear sounds. Different planes have different symbology as to exactly what is targeting you, what's critical threat, what is immediately engaging you, so you'll need to look into the exact aircraft you're flying. But generally, the more boxed and surrounded a marker is, and the louder and angrier the RWR is, the closer it is to shooting you down. Now, the last thing I'd like to mention is the Maverick Seeker head, the video feed for which is shown on the A10's display anytime the Maverick is selected as the active weapon. And you can think of this pretty much like a poor man's forward-looking infrared sensor. It doesn't have the ability to zoom smoothly like a targeting pod and does have very restricted movement, but you can still zoom in and out just between two view settings, and so just like in the first Gulf War, you can use this just as a forward-looking infrared. This isn't as powerful as it used to be before the IR patch. Before the IR patch, I found it incredibly easy to spot ground targets this way because they shone out like sore thumbs. Now with the more realistic approach and its kind of constantly adjusting gain and level, it's a little harder to spot things, but you still certainly can. Particularly in low light conditions, I find it really useful, and the fact that you get several hot spots all in one area whenever you find a base is a really good indication, really easy to visually see. And so whenever I'm looking for ground targets, I'm always scanning with this, and pretty much I just sit with this on. As long as I'm not having to go to air-to-air mode, I'll just sit with my Maverick active just to be able to scan. I used to be able to do a little trick. If you lock, it will automatically try and lock onto a high contrast object. Previously, that was a little bit fudged, and it would very often lock onto the nearest enemy vehicle, whether or not that was a decent high contrast object that the Seeker head was pointing at. You can't really do that anymore. It's a little bit more realistic in that it will just lock onto a high contrast point. But it can sometimes be useful just for directing your attention to where there is a high contrast area, which is normally going to be enemy vehicles. So if in doubt, it doesn't hurt just to quickly click that button, try and lock a target, and see where the Seeker head ends up pointing. Oh, those are my tips. If you have any tips of your own for people trying to find bases on Enigma's Cold War server, do just leave them down below in the description. Last guides that I've posted have had really good feedback in the descriptions, in the comments section, so please do add that. If you found this guide helpful, do consider leaving a like and subscribing. Those both do really help the channel out, helps the algorithm promote these videos. Otherwise, until next time, I hope you all take care and catch you in the next video. Cheers.